Good evening. Welcome to Africa's Vision Network. Africa's Vision Network is a program that talks about cultural awareness for the African American and African, economic empowerment, health, religion, and other issues related to the African and African American community. I am Omar Ashaka, your guest host. We have a very exciting program this evening. The title of the program is The Peach Cobbler Lady, A Journey to Self-Esteem. We're pleased and elated to have our special guest, Dr. Raymond Lawrence Smith. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Thank you.
Dr. Smith, I believe you were born in George, North Carolina. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you earned your bachelor's degree from the University of Omaha.
Yes.
And do you have other educational credentials?
Yeah, I had my master's degree at Washington, D.C. with the American University, and my doctorate is with the American University in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Excuse me. It's my understanding also that you are an airline pilot, or you were an airline pilot as well as a helicopter.
No, just a pilot, just an
pilot?
airplane pilot.
Okay.
I never worked with airlines.
Okay.
I flew airplanes and helicopters,
Okay.
yes.
How long were you flying planes?
For 18 years.
18 years. Well, Dr. Smith, you have such a very diverse background. Mm-hmm. I know time is going to be moving rapidly, but can you tell us a little bit about how you got into writing books?
I was the junior officer in an organization of pilots, had 27 pilots. I was the junior officer. And each time I did something that was not according to regulations or I did something wrong, I was required to write a letter to the commander explaining what I had done wrong. And if you, and the background of this is, they said that the most difficult punishment for a black man is to have him write something. Okay. And he had me write almost every day. And he would correct my papers. And I wrote so much, I got good at it.
Okay. Now, so it was supposed to be a form of punishment,
but it was punishment,
ended up being a benefit for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Peach Cobbler Lady.
Okay.
Can you kind of give us a synopsis as to what that particular book is about?
I created a character, and I put my character in a situation, and I wanted to show how a person can grow with self-esteem. And I made her very insecure, and I put her through situations where she would have to grow.
Okay. Now, I've had a chance to read your book, so we want to make this as real as possible for our audience. What was the main character's name?
Ellen. Okay. Ellen Spriggs.
Okay. And
my sweetheart.
Yes, in reading about her, I noticed one particular feature about Ellen. She was a very pretty young girl, and even a pretty woman. How did that develop? How did you develop her character from that particular characteristic?
I suppose I have seen some pretty women all of my life, and so many of them had flaws. So I had to give her a flaw. Okay.
And what was that flaw?
Alcohol.
Now that's interesting because what year was this? The setting? It was
1935, 1940, in that time frame.
Okay. Were there a lot of alcoholic women back during that period? Do you?
There were some closet alcoholics. I don't think there were that many that was came out in the open. Okay. You see, we had one thing back in those days. When you said the father was the head of the house, the father took care of his household. And if someone was into alcohol, the father took care of it. And it never got outside that house.
Well, it's interesting with Ellen, because Ellen, from what I read, she was married and supposedly from a Christian family. And but her husband, it seems as though he would be violent with her sometime. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Her husband, Sam Spriggs, grew up with parents who believed that to spare the rod ruined the child. And that went for everybody around them. And the only way you could maintain your status as the head of the household was to be violent. And that's how he got his violent streak.
Yet he was known to go to church every Sunday morning.
Yes.
Now,
And he took care of his family.
so was he violent with her because he loved her, or was he violent with her because he was trying to stop her from drinking alcohol?
I think he was violent because he was trying to stop her from drinking the alcohol.
Okay. Well, as we move along in the book, he beat her several times, but one time he broke her jaw. And maybe you could talk briefly as to what provoked him to strike her that time and ended up breaking her jaw, and of course she left home at that time.
When Sam came home from work, he was a hard-working man. When he came home from work, he gave her the money to go to the store and buy the groceries for the following week. She went to the store to buy the groceries for the following week, but in addition to buying the groceries, she bought some liquor. Mm-hmm. And he found that she bought the liquor, and that was the reason his anger flashed. Okay. She was spending the family money for liquor.
But Dr. Smith, you made it even more interesting because she also purchased some candy, I believe, for the children.
Yes.
And she had been instructed by Samuel Spriggs, her husband, not to give the candy to the children.
Mm-hmm. Not to buy the children any more candy, because he heard that the candy was bad for the children's teeth. Mm-hmm. And when she got her liquor, she bought some candy for her children. Mm-hmm. She bought a peppermint stick of candy.
Okay, and I believe that she was breaking it up to distribute it to
when
the
he
kids.
came into the house, yes.
And that's when he struck and he broke her jaw.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the character you had her to leave, I believe, was it on a Sunday morning?
A Sunday morning,
okay.
After the husband and the other children went to church. Mm-hmm. She put on her straw hat and her blue gingham dress and walked out the front door without looking back.
I'm curious, back then, of course, the church is supposed to be there for its church members. Mm-hmm. Had you thought about writing it so the character would go and get some counseling from the church?
No, I didn't think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I created a problem, and I let the father, or the head of the house, solve that problem.
Okay.
And Ellen knew that Sam had already tried to solve the problem when he broke her jaw. Mm-hmm. And she knew if she stayed there, she was going to get more broken than her jaw, so she walked away.
But it also appeared as though this could have been the first step for her journey to self-esteem.
I think so, yes.
Okay. Can you take us to the next step, that big step that Ellen took to move closer to developing her self-esteem?
Ellen had the ability to cook excellent peach cobblers. So every time she got into trouble, you will find her in the kitchen cooking somebody a peach cobbler, because she knew that she could do that. So she reverted back to the thing that she knew best whenever she got into trouble. And then she ran into some good people, some good characters. These people that she met could have easily taken advantage of her, but she ran into some good Christian people along the way. I didn't put them in the book as church-going and Bible-thumping and what have you. I just had them as normal people.
And you did an excellent job with the characters, because I remember reading there was one character, I think as she was on her journey, she stopped by, she saw a lot of people heading to, I guess, a baptism.
Yes.
And there was a gentleman who told her to come on board, so to speak, because the church's doors are open. And but he was a married man, and once again he was doing what all the other men had done. He had his eye on Ellen. And I think I recall his wife coming over to her once again and saying, kind of keep your eyes off of my man. This beauty that you gave her as a character, would you say it was kind of haunting her up to that point?
It haunted her all of her life. It ruined her relationship with her mother and her sisters. And I showed her in the book as being a tomboyish, because her sisters wouldn't have anything to do with her. And the only person in the household with whom she could speak was her father. So she ran the road with her father, more or less.
Yes, I remember reading that, because you talked about how maybe 2 years she didn't speak to her mother, she didn't speak to her sisters. And the reason for that was because the sisters were envious of her beauty.
Yes.
And all the attention that the boys were giving her instead of the sisters.
Yes.
Okay. Also, Dr. Smith, it's interesting you put that part towards the end of the book rather than up front. Now that, of course, that kept my attention in reading, really trying to figure out why this pretty woman was having such a challenge with who she happened to be as a person.
That was just one of my choices. I made the choice not to reveal all about her until it was near the end of the book.
Okay.
So I could keep people interested all the way through.
Well, and the other thing that was interesting, Dr. Smith, even though she was trying to discover her self-esteem, let's talk about Big Jake, because you had some interesting male characters. Mm-hmm. Initially, if one had just started reading the book and read about Samuel Spriggs, they would think it's another situation of black men being violent because he was beating his wife. But then you brought along, I think it was Big Jake. Tell us a little bit about Big Jake as a character.
Big Jake was one of those big, clumsy types, but he was good of heart. He had a good heart. And he happened to have fallen in love with Ellen when Ellen stumbled into his house on her journey from home. Mm-hmm. He found out that she was Sam Spriggs' wife. Big Jake found out she was Sam Spriggs' wife, so it changed his attitude toward her. He didn't want any part of her after, but she walked away from him anyway.
Right, because I believe he had decided he was going to take her back to her husband.
Yes.
And so she decided to get her a straw hat and walking stick and leave. Again, it showed a lot of character on behalf of Big Jake, because he was not like all the other men. He appreciated her beauty because she stayed overnight, or maybe a few weeks, I believe, at his house.
Yes.
But yet he did not try to do what some of the other men did. Well, take us a little further, Dr. Smith. After she left Big Jake's house, I think she was traveling down the road. You had an interesting scene whereby someone was trying to pick her up with a pickup truck.
Oh, yes, yes.
Tell our audience a little bit about that.
Well, she was walking, and a woman walking by herself with a straw hat and a stick, a tobacco stick. And this truck driver, this farmer on a truck, saw her, and he tried to pick her up. And she finally got in the truck with him because there were some wild hogs in the road. And to avoid the wild hogs, she elected the hog in the truck. And she got in the truck with him, and when he made his move on her, she crowned him with her stick.
And Dr. Smith, that was
And then she got out and ran.
Mm-hmm. That was an interesting point in the book, because for the first time, as a reader, I witnessed Ellen fighting back. And at that junction in the book, I was asking myself, I wonder why she didn't fight Samuel Spriggs back, her husband.
The husband was the head of the house, and she was raised to believe that the husband, the head of the house, had all kind of leeway. You didn't fight your husband. Now, she had more than one fight. When she was at the shipyard, there was a man tried to enslave her, and she was able to fight her way out of that one. And because I tried to show her as tomboyish, and she could take care of herself.
Now, Dr. Smith, that was a critical point, I think, in the book where Ellen really started to change, I believe, based on reading the book. And that was when she happened to, this was just before she had the scene where she wanted to fight a bull. Tell our audience a little bit about that and the family that she ended up with that may have helped her a lot.
Ellen was walking down a country road, and she decided she was going to sit on the side of the bank for a while. And you didn't mention, but she had 2 jars of liquor with her, and 2 quart jars of liquor with her. And she sat down on the side of the road and finished off drinking one of the quarts of liquor that she had. And when she got back up, she got up and argued with the son, told the son that you're not supposed to be over there, you're supposed to be. and she continued to walk. She was really drunk. Right. And she saw some bulls and cows in the road, and she attracted the attention of the bull. And the bull started to charge her, and she was come on. And the boy named Norris, Norris's brother, was able to drive a wagon between her and the bull and get her on the wagon so the bull wouldn't destroy her in the field.
Right, and he took her
to his house. Yeah, and that's where she stayed for the next 3 or 4 years.
And the interesting part about that was, again, this was another man that you portrayed, but you portrayed him as a husband who was a faithful husband, because I believe in the book his wife was seriously ill.
She had polio, yes.
And yet, as pretty as Ellen was, he, respected her.
Yes.
Okay. Take us to the part where the wife, Mrs. Walker, started feeling better, and I think Mrs. Walker was thinking it was time for Ellen to move on.
This was one of the ways I wanted to show that even though the husband did not make any moves toward Ellen, he didn't have any designs on her, his wife believed that if she stayed there long enough, he was going to have designs on her, so she tried to get Ellen to move on.
And of course that was very beneficial to Ellen, because this was a man that didn't try to do like the other men.
Well, see, I tried to, I tried throughout the book to portray the black man in a different light than being the devil or the dog that so many people have portrayed the black man. There are some good black men out there, and I tried to, most of the men in my book were relatively good.
Okay. Now, what was memorable for Ellen as well, though, and we'll just talk briefly about it because I know time is moving on, was the young Walker's son, Morris, I believe?
Yes.
Because Morris was real young, but when Ellen first arrived, he smelled alcohol on her. And he kind of brought that, I think, to her, at least to someone's attention, but he ended up getting a whipping for that because his father thought he was kind of out of line.
Yes. Now, the father believed that he had insulted the guest, and he didn't, this was not allowed in those houses back when I was a child. You didn't insult your guests.
So, Dr. Smith, did you purposely put that in your book to ensure that that people would remember that at one time manners were being taught to children? I mean, were you very conscious of putting that in your book, or did that just happen to?
It just happened to slide in there. Because see, that's the way I was raised, and man, I got more whippings than you could imagine, because I used to challenge everything, and just like Norris challenged, I challenged, and my daddy didn't back up a step.
Okay. Now, and of course, later on in the book, Ellen meets Norris again. But let's talk about, I tell you, there was one exciting part for me as I was reading the book, because I really didn't want to put it down. But I tell you, it really got really interesting too, when Ellen was traveling to this beautiful city, Newport News, Virginia. And that was really interesting for me because I was born in Newport News, Virginia.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of put the book to the side for a moment because it was just getting quite, that was quite interesting. But she ended up going to Newport News, and she ended up working, I think, for the shipyard.
Yes.
Briefly tell us about her role as a woman working in the shipyard.
Back in about 1942 or 43, they came to my church. I was from the country down in North Carolina. They came to my church and most of the churches there, and they were asking for women who were not attached, that means they were not married, to go to the shipyard, go to the Navy yard and help paint the ships, help make the ships. And the people from my church went in droves, and they went to the shipyard. But the scene you're talking about, going into Norfolk over the 258, my mother moved to Norfolk when she was 8 years old. And one day I was driving Mother to a funeral someplace, and Mother described that scene to me. She said, "Oh, the prettiest thing she'd ever seen in her life." And I had to slide it in my book.
And that was told to you when you were
by my mother.
When you were how old?
I guess I was 35, 40 years old. But my mother did this She went to Norfolk with her father when she was 8 years old, and she came over that hill and saw all those lights there in Newport News in Norfolk.
So your material for your book is a combination of what you've created in your mind as well as some of your experiences.
Yes.
Right.
And that one, that particular scene came straight from my mother.
Okay. And of course, Ellen had a challenge even when she went there, because they had the black, I guess, quarters for women to stay, and she encountered a problem with the lady who was running the facility, because I remember one situation, Ellen didn't have a middle name, I believe.
Yes.
And the lady felt, well, wait a minute, everybody has a middle name. And the other eerie thing about it, as one who was reading your book, was I have family named Taylor. So when she took that middle name Taylor, I believe, right? So, but at any rate, let's move a little further down in the book. Let's fast forward if we can. Of course, Ellen had a lot of battles even there, because I think there was a military man who was after her.
Yes.
A number of other men. One man, he was after her. I think he was kind of I don't know if he was a drug dealer, a slicker, or whatever, but he tried to control Ellen, and that's when she introduced him, I believe, to her walking stick.
Yes.
And he found himself crawling out of the hotel room because she was beating up on him so bad. But I want to talk a little bit about Morris. As he grew up, he got older, he met a nice lady, he married her, they had a daughter, and they opened, I believe, a family restaurant. Can you kind of take us from there?
And Norris opened this restaurant, and he and his wife were making a decent living. And then he met a man named Jake. And we've talked about Jake before. Jake was the big truck driver. Jake had changed from being a farmer. He went into working at the sawmill, and now he was hauling for the company. And he was on the road. And it was very difficult for truck drivers back in the 40s and early 30s and 40s to find some place that they could get food. So he saw, Jake was driving, and he saw black folks going into this restaurant, and he stopped.
And this was Norris's restaurant then?
Yeah, and this was Norris's restaurant. And when he came back the other way, he stopped at the restaurant, and he met Norris, and they just hit it off from the first time they met.
And I think at the same time he was trying to dry out Ellen. Yes,
he had Ellen in his smokehouse, and he had just left her, and he went back on the road when he met Norris. And then it occurred to him, maybe I can hook up Norris and this young lady here, and we can make a go of it, because what she is good at is cooking.
Right. And Dr. Smith, because time is really moving on, but right quick, the smokehouse. Because some of our audience might wonder, well, what did Jake do with Ellen in the smokehouse?
Back in the day, they didn't have Alcoholics Anonymous. The father put the person who was drinking all the time in the smokehouse and dried them out.
Kind of locked them up in the
smokehouse? Locked them up in the smokehouse and dried them out. Right. See, that father was a very strong person. That father was the head of the household. He was the head of the family, and he took care of business. There was no such thing as going to the cops or going to the police or whatever. The father had to take care of it, and the fathers took care of it the way they saw best, and that was one of the systems they used.
And I thought it was very, very creative the way you tied the two together, Jake meeting Norris and Jake bringing Ellen to Norris. But unfortunately, in the book, Norris's wife and daughter, who he loved dearly, died because of a car accident.
Yes.
And Norris himself started drinking, so he developed an alcohol problem. And fortunately, Ellen got herself together, and she was able to come and help Norris. Ellen went on to even help Virginia, who was a waitress, to overcome a drug problem.
Yes.
Again, Dr. Smith, because time is moving on, close it out with how Ellen ended up with her self-esteem.
Ellen was very insecure, and I used the segment there with Virginia to show Ellen
the waitress. To show Ellen
giving something. And because all through the book, Ellen was a taker. And now I wanted to turn her around and let her give something and show that she had a compassionate side. And the way I did that was have her give herself to Virginia to help Virginia with her problem.
And it was a challenge for Ellen to help Virginia, but ultimately she did.
Yeah.
Dr. Smith, for the women who may have an alcohol problem and people in general who have self-esteem problems, based on Peach Cobbler's Lady, because it seems like the one thing that made Ellen feel good about herself is when she baked peach cobblers.
Yes.
Which suggests that perhaps anybody that has a challenge with self-esteem, if they can zero in on their strong points, that maybe that will help them. But what would you tell someone in the audience who might be watching and thinking, I don't feel good about myself? We don't have a lot of time, but what are some of the key points that you, based on your book, based on those characters, what would you tell them?
The key point, if you don't feel good about yourself, is to do good. If you do good, it will come back to you, and it'll come back in positive ways. And that is my belief, that by doing good, it will come back.
Okay. Dr. Smith, I wish we could talk more about the book, but what I also want to talk about, you wrote another book, and the title of that, your first book was?
The Ice Cream Man.
Okay, and your second book, right quick, the third book will be, what is the name of the new one coming out?
The Buttermilk Biscuit Man.
Okay. Well, Dr. Smith, thank you very much for coming and sharing this wonderful book with us on Africa's Vision Network. And we hope we'll have you back again to share other stories with us. And may God bless you and best of luck to you.
Thank you very much.